Doctors and nurses have read it. What was the craziest example of someone stupidly making their condition worse? Had a patient come in and had accidentally stuck a chainsaw in his leg the day before. He managed to cut the fibula I think and partially cut the tibia. He put some diesel on it and wrapped it in duct tape and kept working. The next day he steps off something and it snaps the rest of the way through. Came in the front door with his leg flopping bending where it shouldn't be. And to top it off he rated his pain at 6/10. Tough old man. We admitted him to ortho to clean out the diesel and necrotic flesh. I saw this young guy in the once who had gotten into a drunken brawl with some guys at a bar. When he woke up the next morning, he started getting some vision changes. He said that it was like a black sheet coming down on his left eye. This is a textbook symptom for retinal detachment. Picture an incredibly thin, delicate membrane on the back of the eye, slowly peeling off because of trauma. It's an emergency in ophthalmology because if it fully detaches, you get permanent vision loss. You basically need to immediately go for surgical repair and then be extremely careful with that eye for weeks afterward. You even have to keep your head down most of the time for the next couple days to help the reattachment process take. So, naturally this guy goes and rides roller coasters all day at the local theme park with his buddies. He first presented to our 2 days later with permanent vision loss in that eye. Six Flags was not worth it. Poor guy. Male patient was in for dehydration and other very routine issues. He had an indwelling catheter placed. Now an odd thing about some men is that they cannot wrap their minds around not standing up to pee. So even though he couldn't feel any urge to urinate he stood up to pee. Felt the catheter, forgot why it was there, and promptly ripped it out. Now has incontinent. Another patient was in recovering from surgery, I think it was knee ankle. Something that required she use a walker while recovering. She decided not to do that and test her leg she fell onto the tile floor and broke her hip. My wife, nurse, has seen on more than one occasion the person on oxygen for emphysema blow themselves up with a cigarette. She said, sometimes it's funny. Like Wile E. Coyote funny, and they're not injured, but sometimes the injuries are quite severe. Had a patient with stage 0 breast cancer, decided not to get the lump taken out and instead pursued traditional Chinese medicine. Came back a couple years later with metastatic breast cancer everywhere. Another patient treated her breast cancer with coffee enemas. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. I had a patient that came in with breast cancer to the hospital. She was Middle Eastern, forgive me. I don't remember exactly where from. I just remember she was wearing a hijab, had a 3-year-old kid and was in the middle of a divorce. Her cancer was not very advanced. She was recently diagnosed. When my doctor asked her what treatment she was getting for the cancer, she said she was doing alternative medicine, basically some sort of antioxidant tea and homeopathic medicines. He looked her in the eye and flat out told her alternative medicine is not going to help. You're going to die if you don't get surgery. Or chemotherapy, or what an oncologist recommends. Look at your 3-year-old and think he will be left without a mother because you'll be dead in a few years if you don't get treated with Western medicine. I think no one had told her this flat out in those words because the look of horror in her face and her immediately agreeing to an oncologist consult in the hospital said it all. I still think there might have been better ways for him to tell her all this, but in the end he might have saved her life by being so forward. The woman who I was taking care of in labor was having heartburn. And she was sucking on a Quickies to get rid of it. However, she was also sucking on the gas and air at the same time for pain relief. And she sucked so hard that she choked on the Quickies and we had to call a code blue because she couldn't cough it back up. We eventually sorted her out and she was okay and went back to laboring. She did literally exactly the same thing 10 minutes later. Had to call a code again. This was one of the times I really wanted to be able to tell a person that they couldn't take their baby home because they were too stupid to be allowed to have children. I was a nurse for 20 years, but this is a story about my husband. The man has a very high pain tolerance and is always hungry. So one day when I met him for lunch I was worried when he wouldn't eat and said his lower abdomen hurt. I talked to a doctor friend and husband was sent for an immediate CT scan. Husband was sent home to wait for the results. So, being him, felt better and ate 2 chili dogs with Fritos. Of course when the doc called and told him to get to the hospital now because his appendix was about to rupture, husband had to be kept in a holding pattern for 12 hours because he'd eaten a big meal. I may have shouted at husband a little bit that day. I have a patient with autism whose mum tells him she can heal him with crystals and he has a demon inside him. Whenever she tries to visit him it's messed him up so much he makes himself vomit so she leaves. It's super effective. Also patients who let their dogs lick wounds, leg ulcers because they think it'll make it heal quicker. It does not. I used to work at an oral surgeon's office. The patient came in needing a tooth pulled and the root was near the jaw, they needed to remove it under anesthesia. The patient did not want to pay for the anesthesia, $350, so he decided to try and take it out on his own. He used pliers or ended up breaking his jaw. We had to go and fix his jaw and wire his mouth shut. Ended up costing him $9,000 instead of $500. I'm a tech. This fairly large woman came into our unit with type 2 diabetes and diabetic ulcers all over her lower legs. No amputations. And a wound that would not heal. Her husband frequently visited her, and just before my shift brought her 6 tubs of the chocolate Pillsbury frosting icing because of her sweet tooth, and they have insulin at the hospital to match the sugar. When I stopped to check on her, she had already finished tub number 4 and said to me, "But I'm already at the hospital, I might as well SMH." Yeah lady, no one ever dies at the hospital. Obligatory, not a doctor. I'm an optician and optometrist, and so many semi-blind people refuse to get glasses because they don't want to spoil their eyes. They come back 6 months later with migraines and complain about not being able to drive in the dark or read. And get angry because their eyesight is not getting better, although they're always training their eyes. It doesn't work like that. Nurse here. The condition was not worsened by the patient himself, but his choice of life partner certainly did not help. Patient was utterly ravaged by advanced cancer. Several doctors have told him and his wife that his condition is terminal. Patient seemed to understand when he was lucid. Wife said she understood as well. He was in hospice for comfort. One night he had trouble breathing, as the dying tend to do. Wife called 911 against patient's wishes. Thus began a 3-week pointless and painful ordeal that involved life support, dialysis, at least 1 round of CPR on a man whose bones were riddled with metastasis and diarrhea. Wife was adamant that he will get better through holistic medicine. On top of being in denial, she was dumber than dirt. She filled the intensive care room with all sorts of new age chalks like inspirational pictures and rocks. She even refused pain medicine because it would, like, dim his chakras. Wife left a crystal god on the bed. Crystal worked its way underneath patient's hip. Patient developed a raging bed sore that never closed. Was nearly always soaked in feces and was a bitch to dress. On a patient who wanted to die and was in already excruciating pain. This was years ago. Still, I can honestly say I hate that woman. Patient here. I got an itch in my eye one night and figured my contact had dried out. I went to remove it, but the damn thing was stuck on my eye. So I started pinching hard, trying to get it off. And then my vision went all wacky and my eye started to really hurt. Gave up and went to the cause I couldn't see. Turns out my contact had fallen out before the whole process started and I'd been scratching the shit out of my eyeball. Had to wear an eye patch and put in some very unpleasant drops for a week or 2. Oops. When I was on medicine wards in med school, we had a patient with a Zenker's diverticulum. It's essentially a weak spot as his esophagus kinda makes an outpouching where food and liquid get stuck. He can then regurgitate the food and aspirate, leading to pneumonia and other bad stuff. We were the primary team and Serg was going to take him back to the ER on Friday. Thursday night he eloped and no one knew where he went. He came back Monday to the ET and got readmitted. When we asked where he went, he said there was a big food festival that weekend that he didn't want to miss. So he went. Instead of getting the surgery he needed, he left to go eat fatty and thick fried foods which literally could have killed him. Wow, what a moron. I can't imagine that level of dumb. My husband had Zenkers that got progressively worse his entire adult life. He had no idea. He just thought food came back up on everyone after eating. It got worse and worse until I dragged him to the gastro. One scope later, they found the Zenkers and had him in surgery in a week. The surgeon said it was the worst case he'd ever seen. That he actually mistook the Zenkers for the esophagus at first. Fascinating as hell. My husband was only 50 when he had the surgery. I think his general good health and decent eating habits helped him as he dealt with the regurgitation for 30 years or so. He's great now with a bad scar on his neck. The surgery changed his life. But he still does intend to eat fatty or fried foods. He had basically trained himself to avoid crap eating over the years because of the Zenkers he didn't know he had. My mom's current BF has oral and throat cancer. I literally has a stoma and no tongue, but still smoking around 3 packs a day until recently. Lil got diagnosed stage 3 lung cancer, quit smoking and drinking for a couple of months. As soon as doctors said her condition was improving, she went straight back to smoking and partying. Only took a few months for the cancer to get to stage 4 and spread to her liver, kidneys, and brain. She smoked up until a couple days before she died, and even then, only because the brain cancer caused her to lose control of her limbs and she physically couldn't hold a cigarette anymore. It was so sad to watch. I'm incredibly proud of my husband though. He quit smoking with her to help support her and never started again even after she did. Said he never wants our girls to have to go through that with him. Not a doctor. But I had a stress fracture in my foot that had to be surgically corrected. I was given a 60-day supply of Vicodin, but my now ex-husband was a recovering alcoholic who had me convinced that I was going to become horribly addicted if I took them for more than a couple days. So I began taking Aleve because it was stronger than Tylenol and I only had to take one a day. My foot was very slow to heal. Like a couple months go by instead of the usual 6 weeks. I had to get a CT scan, and I was very worried because this small little fracture just wasn't healing. My doctor asked what I was doing for pain, and I told him about the Aleve. Turns out NSAIDs interfere with bone healing. I cut out the Aleve, and my foot healed a few weeks later. Work comp adjuster here, had a claimant completely disappear after his surgery was ordered. Fast forward 2 years and he gets an attorney who demands the surgery be approved now. After months of back and forth we approve the wrist surgery. 2 days post-op the police find him walking down a county road. Blasted out of his mind on meth. Ripping out his stitches. Apparently he went on a meth binge and just tore apart his surgical site. Doctor dropped him. His attorney dropped him. The state basically closed his case. The last I heard was he got out of jail. Grabbed all his meds from home and disappeared again. Never followed up with the doctor. I cringe to think what his arm looks like. Here. At a patient who was found unconscious and taken to our hospital. Turns out he was diabetic, unbeknownst to him, and went into a coma. We got him straightened out and sent him home with insulin. Fast forward a week or two and he comes into the ER for vomiting, dehydration and blurred vision. He hadn't been taking his insulin since only really sick people need insulin. We see a lot of people who get a common rash like eczema or some other unspecified dermatitis who very sadly convince themselves that they have bugs or worms or other creatures in their skin. They dig at their skin, pour bleach on themselves several times a day, or even cut themselves into the skin to try to dig these non-existent parasites out. In doing so, they hurt, sting, itch, and suffer more. Some isolate themselves from family and friends, fearing they'll spread a non-existent infestation. It's sad. Edit. Just want to clarify that Ekbom's disease or delusions of parasitosis need not be meth. Also associated with hypochondria, anxiety, depression, ACT. I had a patient with heart failure who told me that they use cocaine because it makes their chest pain feel better. Not stupid, but just plain confused. Grandpa admitted for pelvic distension, pyelonephritis and UTI secondary to urinary retention. Urologist places a Foley catheter in to relieve his bladder and drains 3 gallons of urine in one sitting. Grandpa gets a good day's rest, and all goes well until one night we find him standing butt naked in the middle of his room with his penis oozing a pool of blood at his feet and the catheter, with the balloon still inflated, clutched in his fist. He had a very calm, "What are you all looking at?" expression as we reacted in horror. His nurse quickly calls the urologist again, and he places another Foley catheter with orders for continuous irrigation and to transfuse a unit of blood. Kept him longer in the hospital than he really needed to be.